Stories of horror, greed, and murder. Rumors of ghosts and witches. Cultures and creatures from the deepest bayous, highest mountains, and the thickest of woods. These are the tales and legends from the darkest places of the world, weaved together through the tapestry of time. This is Waking Ribbons.
To whom it may concern, I am scared to death. 9 years ago, they finally let me out, and I was just beginning to feel better. I am not myself any longer. I guess you could not even recognize my face if you saw me now. That phone call 2 hours ago has torn me apart. It was Grandma. She invited me back to the old house. I do not want to go back, but I must. Maybe you will understand my fear if I tell you what happened during my childhood 18 years ago. I was living with my mother and my sister Missy in Grandma's old house. I had been told that Grandma was away on a long vacation and that she would soon return. She did. I later found out that she was actually being released from that same asylum. She's insane, they said, when she kept on babbling about them. I still cannot make up my mind about who really did separate Grandpa's head from his shoulders. You see, they were always so nice to me. Anyway, time is short, and I must leave for the old house. So here's what happened 18 years ago. And in case we never see each other again, at least you will know why.
I bet we are going to have tea.
Look, the old bitch is back.
Yeah, finally, we'll get some company again.
The attic room has been locked up for far too long.
Just like the old bitch herself.
She's on time. Though, why that silly wheelchair?
Oh, she's pretending as always. But she does make a good cup of tea.
Oh my god. She's here.
It was a 4-story Victorian home, quite old at the time. It was just Mother, Missy, and I. We had been waiting for her return. Missy watched through the giant window in the den as the men in the van unloaded Grandma in the wheelchair, struggling to see in the light from the single bulb on the porch. Mother turned to us as she sat in her chair, looking down her nose at her children, and said, "Missy, listen to what Mother says. Now, be good to Grandma, and remember, she's been away on a long vacation." I was sitting at the piano, playing with the high notes, and letting them fade out. "That goes for you too, King," she spat at me. My attention jolted to her angry face. "And stop playing with that thing. Answer the door." I hadn't realized anyone was knocking. I stood up quickly, making the piano stool screech against the wooden floor behind me. I jogged to the front door. Just beyond the large wooden door, sitting in an old wooden wheelchair, was a wrinkled and fragile figure. The yellow light from the lonely bulb made eerie shadows on her features, but she was clear enough to see. On her head was a knit cap, holding down wild, white curls. A set of tiny spectacles sat lightly on the bridge of her large nose. Her lips were pursed, and her skin drooped heavily around her mouth, making long, papery jowls. A thin silver sliver of spittle sparkled in the light. She clung to her shawl as she glared at me, staring at her. The 2 men flanking the chair folded their arms impatiently, glaring at me, standing in the doorway. "Grandma," I said with a shaky voice, "welcome home." I moved out of the way and let the men push her into the living room, which one of them did, and without a word, the 2 men left quickly, running to their van and speeding down the driveway into the darkness of night. I knelt next to her chair and took her oh-so-fragile hand in my young fingers. You have been gone far too long. I didn't know the words I was speaking, but they felt absolutely right. I sincerely wanted to welcome her back. I felt gratitude that she had come back to us. Is this a dream? I said, looking at my mother, then back at my grandmother. Are you really back? Grandma looked down at me and smiled. She put a small hand on my cheek. I remembered preparing her attic room for her, but I couldn't remember how she told me to prepare it. I was possessed in getting it just right only days ago, the instructions whirling in my head and the feeling that someone was telling me how to do it all correctly. I stood up and stepped quickly toward the window. Grandma, I said, take a look. What do you think of the house? I motioned around the room. And the silvery moon. I pointed toward the window. Before she could respond, I said, we're going to paint the front door soon. I was incensed, so glad and excited to have my dearest grandmother back in her home again. I knelt next to her chair once more. I could feel Mother and Missy's eyes on me as I acted so strangely to them. Wait till you see your room up in the attic, I told Grandma with a smile. Prepared just like you said, without a bed. Grandma chuckled. Are you tired, Grandma? Let me bring you upstairs. You must be tired. Without waiting for a response from Mother, Missy, or dear Grandma, I began pushing the creaking wheelchair toward the stairs. You'll find your rocking chair, I said, as I slowly rolled the chair up each stair, trying not to jostle her too much as we went up each of the stairs, all the way up to the attic. I turned the knob to the dark room and opened the door. It wailed as it slowly swung open. As it did, the candles lit by themselves. But somehow, this did not frighten me, as I stopped Grandma's chair just outside of the room. I pointed to the table in the middle of the room, and the teapot that Missy found. Grandma nodded. She had not spoken a word since our arrival. Are you all right, Grandma? I said, kneeling once more next to her chair. You know, Missy and Mother would probably want to visit with you. Would that be all right? Grandma did not respond as she looked at me with her sunken eyes behind the glasses. Grandma, what was it like? I asked, almost in a whisper. To be on that holiday site. She took in a deep breath, and she finally spoke to me.
Oh, it could have been worse,
She replied.
but with them by my side, in the twilight, they sang all the old lullabies.
Grandma smiled sweetly at the memory. I paused a moment to think who she was talking about. Grandma, I said softly, who are they? Slowly she turned her eyes to me, and like daggers they became, sharp and piercing. Suddenly she was very cross with me.
Never mind,
She growled at me.
you dirty little brat. Let us go inside.
I stood up in shock, as if she had struck me. I thought that I had recovered quickly, as I said to her, Let me help you out of the chair, Grandma. She ignored my stutter as I took her hand. I think there's something waiting for you. Now come along. Let me touch you, I thought to myself. Let me feel. I sighed. As I walked her to her rocking chair, her voice croaked.
Something's on their mind.
She stopped and looked up at me. I felt the hair stand up on the back of my neck.
They are still alive.
She said to me.
Can you feel their eyes?
I could, so I nodded. She shook her finger at me as she hobbled her way to the rocking chair by herself.
Now that you're stuck with me,
she said as she slowly sat on the cushion in the chair.
you better be my friend.
Yes, Grandma, I said. I began helping her prepare to settle in for the night. When she was set, she instructed me to go to my own room, which was right next to hers, and go to bed. It was my bedtime anyway, and I was so very tired. So I obeyed my dearest grandma. Late that night, I awoke from my sleep, hearing unknown voices and insane laughing coming from the room next to mine. I heard Grandma's voice amongst them. I got out of my bed and slowly opened my door so that it made no sound. I tiptoed over to Grandma's door. As I stood there, alone in the dark, peeking through the keyhole, I couldn't believe my eyes. I'd never seen anything like it. Only Grandma was inside the room, speaking to no one. She sat at her table, set for tea, and as I watched, cups were rising in the thin air, then emptied on the floor. I felt my heart beat in my ears. As I watched, this had to be a dream. I knew Mother and Missy were downstairs, asleep in their own beds. I wondered if I should go and get them. Suddenly, the door was open, and I heard Grandma's voice say,
Do come in, my little friend.
I did as she told me and entered her room. I sat in a chair at the table. She offered a cup of hot tea to me on a saucer with 2 little cookies on it. She smiled at me as I took a sip.
King,
She said to me,
look me deep in the eyes.
I did as she instructed. I began to feel sluggish and drunk. My thoughts slowed down to meet her words.
You will forget what you saw here tonight.
I nodded in agreement. She paused for a moment.
I will let you in on the secret of this house, boy. The secret of Amon. That's what we call this house.
She smiled sweetly at me, and through my haze, I smiled back.
Now I want you to go back to sleep.
She motioned toward the door.
Go back to sleep, my dear.
I nodded again and got up from my chair. As if in a dream, I walked very slowly back to my room, got in my bed, under my warm covers, and I fell back into the deepest sleep. If only Mother and Missy could have seen me in Grandmother's chair. Days went by until the following Friday night. After I had just turned out the lights for bed, Grandma came and knocked at my door. She slowly opened it, letting the hinges squeak softly as it swung open to reveal her form, looking much stronger since her return. She beckoned me quietly to go with her.
Wake up, King.
She said,
Wake up, my dear. I am going to show you about the house of Amon.
She smiled as she spoke, excited to share her secrets with her only grandson. She waved her hand to instruct me out of my bed.
It's time for tea.
She said, almost singing the words.
It's time again.
I obeyed my grandmother and followed her to her room. She opened the door, and a frightening sight greeted me. My mother sat in the rocking chair. She sat slumped and breathing softly in the chair as it rocked slowly.
Why, even your mother is present,
said Grandma as she motioned toward Mother.
We made her sleep in my rocking chair,
she said, and giggled. Chills went up my spine as I felt that I should be scared. And I was at first, but there was no reason to feel that way. I saw the knife sneaking out from Grandmother's dress just before she reached for it. I sat in one of the chairs at the table as my grandmother cut a tiny wound in my mother's little hand. Blood was running into the teapot that my grandmother held under my mother's lip hand. She looked back at me and grinned. Then she turned back to her task as she collected my mother's blood in the teapot. And from somewhere deep inside the walls, or maybe it was the air around us, I heard them laugh. They were laughing as my mother's blood mingled inside the teapot with the tea.
A bit of this in a cup of tea,
Said Grandma.
is what takes to set them free.
She smiled at me as she carried the teapot back to the table and took her seat.
You will hear them telling stories from far beyond this earth.
She said. With that, she poured a bit of tea into my cup, then into hers. I can't explain it to you, dear reader, why, but what I saw and what I heard made me want to stay and learn. I really hoped this dream would never end. It's hard to describe the kind of feeling that went on in my mind. A paradise, perhaps, hearing their stories and feeling their warmth. We laughed with tears in our eyes, from the first cup of tea to the last drop of blood. Nothing seemed to matter at all anymore. And my mother? She didn't exist to me any longer. I felt so heavenly. One night, when we had our tea, that bloody tea, I remember that Mother complained of being very dizzy and in a great deal of pain. Mother was getting weaker and more pale by the day. Then one morning, Missy came to me. My sweet, dear sister took me by the hand into Mother's room, still drunk on power and magic. I looked at her with indifference as Missy begged that I call for help. Missy's cheeks flowed with tears as I looked at the white skin of my mother. She had no color. I felt a smile begin to spread on my cheeks. Missy reached for the telephone that I should call for a doctor. I grabbed the receiver from her hand. With their rage, I took my pocket knife and cut the cord. I slammed the receiver down as I glared through their eyes at Missy, and as I turned to walk, without a word out of the room, Missy shouted at my back.
I hate you!
But I felt nothing. The following Monday night, after every light was out, I lay in the dark in my bed, staring through the tiny window at the stars, waiting for tea time. I heard a light shuffling from the staircase. I sat up to see Mother as she swayed softly up the last few steps and into the black of Grandma's bedroom. I lay back down and smiled, patiently waiting a little while longer. Now I could hear their happy whispers in anticipation for tea time. I knew Grandma had sent them again, the invisible friends, to fetch Mother. A little later, in the middle of tea, we came close to ecstasy. I was drunk on the magic, and they all seemed to sit with us at the table, sipping their bloody tea. They were telling us tales, and their whispers, they regaled me with colorful legends and creepy stories from beyond. The whispers halted suddenly when Grandma rose from her seat. She hobbled over to her bedroom door. She opened the door, and there was Missy, my sister. Her face suddenly filled with shock and horror, seeing Mother in Grandmother's chair. Mother was limp in the chair, and she was frail and white. Missy went into tears and began screaming.
What have you done?
She wailed,
What have you done to my ma?
her voice getting more shrill by the syllable. Suddenly, I could hear Grandma saying,
We'd better get rid of her. She's too young anyway.
Grandma began to move toward Missy, saying,
Bye-bye, Missy.
she said with a large grin.
Be gone forever.
I watched, unmoving, as Grandma grabbed Missy's wrists with unbelievable strength. I saw Missy struggling in Grandma's wrinkled hands.
Oh no, let me be.
She cried as Grandma's eyes stared daggers in their struggle.
Oh no, please. No, Grandma, please. Grandma, you're hurting me. You know,
Grandma snarled in Missy's face.
the beautiful fireplace in the kitchen will do.
With that, Missy managed to pull herself away from the old woman. She ran to the table and grabbed a teapot.
Don't touch me,
She shrieked.
or I'll break it.
Grandma stood between Missy and the bedroom door. There was only one safe way out. Missy looked at me, who was no threat to her or Grandma. I felt myself still wrapped in the spell of them. This seemed to set her off. She squeezed her eyes shut, allowing tears to fall down both of her cheeks. Then she shrugged and said,
I'll do it anyway.
And she smashed the teapot to the wood floor. I saw the liquid spreading as the bloody tea ran all over the floor. The teacups that had been floating as they enjoyed their tea fell onto the table and then smashed to bits on the floor. Then, as if held by invisible hands, Grandma stood still as Missy ran past her to the stairs. I waved her goodbye as she passed the table where I was sitting. Missy was sobbing. I could hear her cries as she hurried down the stairs. I don't know how long I was sitting there, but eventually I came to my senses. I stumbled out of Grandma's room, down the stairs, and out of the house. Once outside, I felt my mind begin to fight a battle for control. With the teapot broken, I kind of realized that their power was less here on the outside. I fell to my knees in haziness and looked in through the window to the cellar. Things were moving down there. They were searching for something, and they found it. I watched the big axe fly by itself out through the cellar door, up the stairs to the kitchen. Before I could see where it landed, I lost consciousness. I woke up only feet away from the fireplace. My vision was less foggy. I felt actually awake. No more haze or loss of control, only to have my eyes assaulted from the charred skeleton of my sister staring back at me. I knew it was her because a bit of her dress had not burned. I wanted to scream. I wanted to retch. I did neither of those things. Instantly, I knew who was to blame for this. The spell was broken. I really felt the change. As my mind and body became one again, the moon was alive with its silvery eye, staring right into my evil heart. I decided to go back upstairs to the attic, where I knew my grandmother awaited my return. "Oh, I hate that bitch," I said, as I stood up to my feet. I took each and every step up the 3 stories, hiding my thoughts away, deep inside my mind. And there she was, in her chair. Her eyes went hard, staring right into my brain. Grandma whispered to me as I approached her in her chair.
King, don't be a fool. I know you plan evil things for me.
I shook my head, all the while hiding my thoughts. Clearing my mind was important. "Come now, Grandma. I would never hurt you." I knelt again by her side next to her chair. "I love you, Grandma." She was quiet for a time, staring me down. But soon she seemed to believe everything I said. And then she asked me if I would help bring her outside. I did as she asked. The same cool night air as before touched my skin. And as if she was not part of the plan to kill my dearest Missy, she softly bade me.
Let us stay a while, bathing ourselves in the moonlight.
Oh, I was lucky. She had trusted that I was still under their spell. Maybe she didn't know that outside she was unprotected by them. Maybe she actually wanted to die. Maybe they thought that I would come back inside to face their wrath. It does not matter. I grasped my grandmother's cane from her hand. "I have you now, old woman," I growled at her. "You're not going to escape. Now that I've got you here, you will pay for your deeds. Your sick mind has come to an end now."
Stop it!
I remember hearing her screech. I can remember gurgling and the smell of liquid copper. And then I remember running into the darkness of the woods as far as I could. the low-hanging limbs slapping my wet, tear-stained face, the cold air caressing my sticky cheeks. And I saw their eyes. And then I fainted again, going insane, dreaming that I was one of them. Someone found me, only yards into the trees, the sun only barely creeping over the tree line. They brought me back to the house and sat me inside an ambulance. I was peppered with questions that I did not answer from the police. The answers were obvious. My mouth dripped with the old woman's blood from her half-severed head. How could I ever explain to them? No one ever again found a trace of Missy. I'd be the last to tell them anyway. As I sat silent in the ambulance, watching the morning dew drip from the trees, the police were searching the house. I could hear them singing softly to me. And then a man in nice clothing stepped toward me. His voice was muffled at first. Then he repeated himself, which became a bit clearer. "Hello, King," he said softly. "I'm Dr. Landau." He handed a wet cloth to me and said, "Would you like to wipe your face, King? It must be sticky and itchy." I nodded and took the cloth from him. It was warm and wet. I began to wipe my mouth and neck. And as I did so, he asked, "What happened here, King?" I chuckled and shook my head. "You would not believe me if I told you," I said as I scrubbed. He shrugged. "Try me." I looked up into his dark brown eyes. They were honest and inquisitive. I shook my head. "Okay," I said, sighing. He sat next to me in the back of the ambulance. A chill ran up my spine. I told the doctor the whole story from start to finish. At least everything that I could remember. When it was done, he stood up and took several steps from me. He had his hands in his pockets as he looked around, as if his eyes were looking for someone. He looked back at me. "So answer this question. Are you mad or just insane?" He shook his head as he said this. My heart dropped. "Never mind," he said. He motioned towards someone out of my view. Someone came closer. 2 men. The same 2 men who brought Grandma home from her holiday. "You can take him away now," said Dr. Landau. "The boy has lost his mind." And with that, the 2 men scooped me up as I wailed at the doctor that this was a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake, and I haven't seen my mother since they took me away. And Dr. Landau wouldn't tell me anything at all. But now, I am released, back on the outside. Time has caught up with me, and I must leave for the old house.
Hello? Hello, King?
Who's this?
It's your grandmother.
You're dead?
In a way, yes. Now listen. Are you still there?
I'm still here, Grandma. Yes.
Come to the old house tonight. There's quite a few people here who'd love to see you.
Stop it, bitch. I'm starting all over again. Yes, I must leave now. Grandma, I'm coming. I'm coming home now.
Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It has been a labor of love, to say the very least. If you like it, please click the thumbs up button. And if you enjoy the content, please subscribe and click the bell icon for future alerts. Y'all take care, and I'll see y'all real soon.